Welcome to the Black Archives Safer at Home virtual series. My name is Louis Berthen. I am the assistant archivist, and today I'm doing my segment called Legacies, Profiles, and Greatness. So today I'm going to be talking about Dr. Solomon Mckenzie Frazier, otherwise known as Dr. Sm Frazier. I'll show you another photo for the people who didn't get to see it. So this is him. And he was a remarkable man in many ways, and I just like to remind you of a couple things before I start. When he began practicing here in Miami, it was 1904, it was in the backdrop of a segregated Miami and really a segregated United States. Hi, AB Queen. Hi, Miami Gardens Now. I am starting my segment on Dr. Sm Frazier. So thank you for joining in. Caught me right at the start. So like I was saying, he began practicing here in Miami in what was the backdrop of a segregated Miami and segregated United States. And in a lot of ways, he grew alongside the city. So he started practicing in 1904, and just for statistics' sake, in 1896, the year of incorporation of Miami, the city's population was 1,681. By 1930, the city had grown to 111,000 people. Another thing is that black medical professionals like Dr. Frazier were not allowed to practice in public hospitals. By extension, black patients were not admitted to these hospitals either. It wasn't until 1952 that the first time a black medical professional was admitted as hospital staff. So I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but I just wanted to start off with it. So Sm Frazier was born in Cerro Gordo, North Carolina in 1874. And actually, it starts right here. An interesting factoid about him is that many people who knew him kind of dispute the year that he was born. The reason for this is that he was delivered by a midwife, and the written documentation of his birth was lost. Another interesting thing is that, again, this is 1874 in North Carolina. This is the post-Civil War Reconstruction South. Midwives were actually very good about keeping their documentation and turning it in. What would happen a lot of the time, and this is not specific to Dr. Sm Frazier, but it is a known thing, that a lot of these white government officials, these clerks, would dispose of, discard, or just lose the documentation. So that is why there is no recorded documents of his birth. So unfortunately, by the time he was 5 years old, his father passed away, and this left his mother to take care of 5 children by herself. So he gives a lot of credit to his mother for instilling Christian values in him, and in a 1949 article, he wrote this of her. As a little boy at mother's knee, I remember how painstaking she was in instilling the principles of Christianity in me. How she taught that the practice of Christian ethics must be necessity, be the blueprint for living, or I would never realize the fullness of life. And he takes his Christian values very seriously, and he really does live it in many aspects of his life. So together, the family moved from North Carolina to Williston, Florida in 1885. He started working at a young age, but his mother made sure that he attended school while working. He was actually the first in his family to do so. For those who don't know, who just joined, I'm talking about Dr. Solomon Mckenzie Frazier. Right? So Frazier attended the Cookman Institute in Jacksonville, and he received a first grade teaching certificate, and he taught for 5 years in the colored section of Williston. So this Cookman Institute bears no relation to the Bethune Cookman School, but funnily enough, Mary Mcleod Bethune and Dr. Frazier were actually very good friends. So around this time, his older brother Powell suffered a terrible head injury, and that almost caused his death. The recuperation for Powell was long and painful, and due to the lack of quality health care available to them, it was a long and painful process due to the lack of quality health care. So among many sources and researchers, this event is cited as one of the main reasons why Dr. Frazier decided to study medicine. So he started attending Meharry Medical College in 1900. So Meharry is an incredible school. It was actually the first medical college for blacks and had a lot of great alumni who came and practiced in Miami and all over the United States. By 1904, he completed his tenure and came to Miami to start his practice. He wasted no time establishing it. He paid $5 for the state medical license and $2.50 for his county license. Along with his medical practice, he opened a pharmacy, which was the usual for doctors of the time. It was known as the People's Drugs. So, unfortunately, it was not the first black-owned pharmacy in Colored Town. That credit goes to Dr. J. Butler, who opened the Magic City drugstore a couple months before him. However, Dr. Frazier was in business for a much longer time because Dr. Butler moved to Jacksonville in 1906 after the birth of his child. So for those who are interested, again, he opened his practice in 1904. If you want to know what the calculation is, the $5 from 1904 to today, $5 roughly equals $144 with 3 cents, and the $2.50 equals $72.09. So it was a pretty penny. And all right, so the first medical office that Dr. Sm Frazier opened was located at 1036 Northwest 2nd Avenue, and he opened a second location many years later at 210 Northwest 11th Street. He was noted for giving his care to families who were in need and could not necessarily pay him for his care. But that did not stop him from helping all people all over Florida. So according to a 1964 article that he was interviewed, he charged about $2 per visit, and he said himself that he never did collect on many of these bills. So he is famous for his travels to see his patients. He crossed much of Florida from Coconut Grove, Lemon City, Fort Lauderdale, to Perrine, all the way to Dania on his infamous bicycle. He is quoted as saying that a bike had as much value as a Cadillac. It is believed that his travels to Fort Lauderdale and Dania are some of the earliest on record for an African-American physician to practice there. So, on top of being a licensed doctor and pharmacist, he was also a surgeon, and midwives called on him regularly, like during emergency cases that they couldn't deliver the baby, to help deliver many babies in Florida. So he also responded to many emergencies in Colored Town. There was a gambling dispute that ended up with a man being stabbed by a couple of assailants. This man was taken to his home, and Dr. Frazier rushed to the scene to treat his wounds. This allowed the man to survive long enough that the police were able to come talk to him and apprehend the people who stabbed him in the first place. Another time, there was a man called Ben Franklin who went to the residence of his girlfriend and shot her 4 times, killing her. Franklin then tried to commit suicide by shooting himself twice in the chest. When Dr. Frazier found out, he rushed to the scene and actually helped Franklin survive despite the terrible act he committed. He kept him stable until his care was turned over to another doctor. Dr. Frazier was praised for his humane treatment of this individual, and it really does illustrate the kind of man he was and how deeply he lives his Christian values. Because, doctors take the Hippocratic Oath that they will do no harm, but many people would maybe not have helped him in that scenario. So, a lot of the information that I'm getting is coming from these news articles. And these early news articles, this is in the time before the Miami Times, which again opened in 1923. The way that the Colored Town community would get their news was literally through 2 columns called Colored People Here and Elsewhere and the Colored Column by W. Pericles Pickens. So the column in 1904 wrote a short blurb about the esteemed daughter of Howard and Maria Brown joining Sm Frazier as the clerk at People's Drugs. She was Elizabeth Brown, and this woman actually became the doctor's first wife. Unfortunately, in 1907, tragic event occurred while Dr. Frazier was away delivering another baby. Elizabeth went into labor with their first child, and while Elizabeth was in labor, she suffered a hemorrhage, and he arrived too late to be able to help her, and she unfortunately passed away. However, the baby girl was born healthy, and he gave her mother's name. After this, Dr. Frazier was in a serious rut. Of course, it was a very sad event, and he seriously considered leaving South Florida. He went to Georgia and got his state license there and everything. However, he decided that his community in Colored Town was not worth leaving, and he continued to serve us in South Florida for another 60 years. So a couple doctors came to Miami between 1904 and 1907, but they came and left, and effectively this made Dr. Sm Frazier the only licensed African-American physician in Miami until the arrival of Dr. W.B. Sawyer in 1908. So in 1910, Dr. Frazier founded the Dade County chapter of the Florida Medical, Dental, and Pharmaceutical Association and the Dade County chapter of the National Medical Association of America. So the National Medical Association of America is actually one of the oldest professional organizations for African American physicians. And like I said at the beginning, all of this is in the backdrop of a segregated United States. A lot of these professional organizations, well, the white organizations, did not allow the admittance of black professionals. So these organizations played an important role in getting these doctors together, building a sort of fraternity where they can share ideas and go to conventions. He went to a convention in Richmond, Virginia, which was the 24th NMA conference. So he actually served as the president of the Florida Medical, Dental, and Pharmaceutical Association in 1915 and the state vice president for the NMA on various occasions between the 1920s and 50s. In 1926, Miami suffered a horrible hurricane. It leveled a lot of the city, and Colored Town specifically suffered major property damage. About 100 people lost their lives, and many others were injured. Dr. Frazier worked tirelessly after this to help his hurting community. He and D.A. Dorsey, who was Colored Town's first black millionaire, were appointed to the Negro Relief Committee, and they organized relief stations all over Colored Town, and they worked in tandem with organizations such as the Red Cross and the American Legion. Dr. Frazier also served as part of the Mount Zion rebuilding effort. Mount Zion sustained a lot of damage during this hurricane, and in 1928 they successfully rebuilt the church. He was very dedicated to his church and to his religion. There's actually an ad that lists him as a prominent religious figure, chairman of the board of directors of Mount Zion, and the treasurer of the earlier mentioned building fund. And I have that article right here. So I know it's backwards, but you can see the addresses of his two offices: prominent religious figure and chairman of the board of directors at Mount Zion Baptist. So he also helped establish, along with D.A. Dorsey, the Miami Industrial Mutual Benefit and Savings Association. He served as the first president of this organization, and this organization was actually one of the first and earliest African American banks incorporated in Florida. Along with this, he made considerable real estate investments and built many complexes in South Florida. If you remember last week, I was talking about Kelsey Farr's famous article in 1916. He actually mentions Dr. Sm Frazier as one of the men who were very successful in their endeavors. I have to agree. So Dr. Frazier was also one of the founders of Christian Hospital, the Christian Hospital Association that eventually became Christian Hospital. This is important because Christian Hospital was the first hospital dedicated to the healthcare of blacks in Colored Town. And you have to remember that black patients were not seen at places like Jackson Hospital. By extension, black professionals were not allowed to practice in the publicly funded hospital either. So this hospital was of the utmost importance. So like I had said earlier, it wasn't until 1952 that a Miami hospital let a black professional work as a staff member, and that was actually Mount Sinai of Miami Beach. So again, he got to Miami in 1904, and it wasn't until 1952 that a publicly funded hospital allowed for the entrance of a black professional. So Ellie Thomas, famed judge, actually wrote a short article on professional pride in 1942. And in this article, he talks about the Dred Scott decision and how it affected professional practice in Miami. He lists many doctors and practitioners in Miami through the years, and interestingly, he notes how Dr. Frazier would go on leave during the summers to continue taking courses to improve his profession. Like I said, the association was an important part of that. He also mentioned how People's Drugs, his pharmacy, had filed more than 40,000 prescriptions since 1925, which is a large number. So in 1964, at 90 years of age, or 96, again, it's debated because they don't know specifically what year he was born in, he gave an interview to the Miami Herald on which he reflected on his life and what he accomplished. And a couple of things he said really stuck with me. So one of the first quotes is, he remembers the anguish of the sick people he could not help. And let's really analyze that. In this whole article, he doesn't talk about how many people he helped, the amount of work it must have gone into, the amount of biking he went all up and down Florida for these patients, how he did it for virtually no pay, and he had to shoulder a lot of financial burden because if he wasn't getting paid, he still needed to re-up on his supplies. That's not what he mentions. all he does is remember the pain of the people he couldn't help. And this is very illustrative of the kind of man he was. Like I said, he really did live these Christian values. He tried to help as many people as he could, regardless of whether they could pay or not. Another thing that he said that really stuck with me is that he remembers the rapid advance of medicine, but the slow decline of prejudice. And like I said, he arrived in 1904. It wasn't until 1952 that a black professional was allowed in a publicly funded hospital. In many ways, this still goes on today. We know that the healthcare system, there is a large gap in service to the black community. And it's unfortunate that he said this back in 1965, but it was not, so this day, it's been 60 years, and I can't really say that much has changed. I would like to read an excerpt of an article he wrote in 1918, and I think it's even more prescient because he wrote it about the typhoid fever, which was one of the pandemics that were taking over the country in 1918. Seeing as how we're in the midst of our own pandemic, I would like to read this to you. It is a fact that the majority of the human family pays but little attention to good health or the little things, which if not looked after will set the whole machine out of normal working order. As long as we are well and the world moves along smoothly, no thought is given to the thing, which in my mind is the greatest legacy, which man possesses, good health. It is more precious than wealth, for all we may have millions, but would surrender all for good health. There are thousands to who would part with all they have if by doing so they could regain their good health. Reaching out after more of the world's goods seems to be the thought uppermost in the minds of the majority. I do not wish to advance the idea that we are to refrain from making an honest living, or that we should not possess all the wealth possible, but I do think, other things being equal, health is of the first importance. And to neglect removing from a community the things which are productive of ill health is worse than criminal. It is strange, and yet it is true, that there are countless numbers of people who know the evil effect of many little things which produce disease, and yet they thoughtlessly, day by day, violate the laws which prevent them. So, I'd like to just read out a couple sentences again. As long as we are well and the world is moving along smoothly, no thought is given to the thing. Again, he was talking about health. There are thousands who would part with all they have if by doing so they can regain their good health. And again, he mentions that there are countless numbers of people who know the evil effect of many little things which produce disease, and yet thoughtlessly, day by day, they violate these laws. So, not to make too much commentary about our own healthcare system today, but we know that they do prioritize profits over the health of the people that they are serving. This can be, in my eyes, counts as one of the little evils that people commit every day. Another thing, and probably in the context of this article, he was talking about alcohol, which was one of the things that was doing damage to a lot of people during the day. He may have also been talking about the poor sanitation and poor living conditions that people were in Overtown. It is very appropriate, Ms. Brain, and I agree. It does make me sad because this article was written it was written 102 years ago, and it's just as applicable today to what we're going through. And I mean, you would think that we'd be able to figure it out with all that time. But that pretty much covers him, and he had an untiring advocacy for good health care. As you can see through that article, he pointed out a lot of things that he saw. And like I said earlier, he had seen how the progress of medicine, the rapid advance of medicine, but the slow decline of prejudice. And that is still a thing that is applicable today. So he died a couple months after the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So like I said earlier, he did grow alongside the city in many ways. He saw Miami go from this small frontier town to this booming metropolis. He saw the rise and effectively the fall of Colored Town, which became Overtown. His family, his daughter, actually had to leave the house that he lived in because of the construction of the expressway. It bulldozed their house down. So he saw many things in South Florida, in South Florida's history. And he practiced medicine for over 60 years. So he was dedicated not only to his church, to his religion, but he was dedicated to, again, medicine in general and the health of everyone. And I see your question, E.B. Queen, to the first black hospital in the U. Is that a reference to UM, Brewster Hospital? So I do not know about Brewster Hospital, but I do know, again, I had mentioned it earlier, that he had been a part of building the Christian Hospital Association and the Christian Hospital by extension. So that one I know for sure he was involved in. I will look into the Brewster Hospital because I hadn't seen that in my research. But that pretty much covers Sm Frazier and a lot of what he did in his life. I will take any questions that you guys have during this, while I'm waiting for you guys to type out some questions. I'm going to read out a couple of fun facts that I found in these columns. So I don't know, because the thing is, E.B. Queen, when he came from Jacksonville, he became a medical professional and pretty much stayed here the rest of the time. He was part, like I said, he was the president of the medical association, so maybe he was tangentially part of it. Maybe he helped get it started in some way, or helping some professionals move out there. But it's not, I can't tell you for sure that that is something that he was a part of. It's a good question though, I will look into it. So one of the things in the column that that was written about him is that he actually had a soda fountain installed in his drugstore in 1905, which is fun because it served soda and ice cream. In 1906, he was one of the men who went to the city council and fought against the sale of alcohol in Colored Town. He was part of many organizations. He was part of the Everglades Lodge. He was part of the East Light Lodge, and he took part in the Knights Templar degree, which was the highest Masonic order in the city. From 1905 to 1907, the colored column would actually announce the trips of the doctor. So obviously this was in the time before telephones, so this was the best way to let people in the community know that he was not going to be in, so that they could reschedule their appointments. In 1916, he and R.E.S. Toomey were selected to find leaders for the colored YMCA in Overtown, and he actually also helped collect money for the War Saving Stamp Drive, and he was a 4-Minute Man, which we know that was for World War I. The 4-Minute Men were orators who basically tried to drum up, I guess for lack of a better word, excitement for World War I, try to get support for it, and the War Saving Stamp Drive was a way to fund it. He also sang in the Mount Zion Choir until he was about 86. And I'm going to look into it, E.B. Queen, because that is good, the Brewster Hospital for Midwives, because I would like to know if he was a part of that. But if there's any other questions, I'll take them now. If not, remember that tomorrow we have the virtual field trips with the director Timothy Barber at 12 o'clock. And tomorrow night we have a very special Lyric Live. We're doing the second Lyric Live from the living room, which is going to take place at 8 p.m. And I'm going to write the handle here, Miami. And so that is for the Instagram page that we're going to be doing the Lyric Live tomorrow. And that's at 8 o'clock, so join. It's going to be very exciting. It was a lot of fun last week. And on Saturday, we have Story Time in Color with Camila Pritchett at 11 a.m. Jocelyn, he graduated from Harry Medical in 1904, which was the first black medical college. So it was a great school, and a lot of alumni came to Miami from there. Thank you, Kate Peasy. Thank you, Ms. Braining. And yes, sorry, thank you, KPZ. It's Lyric Theater MIA. But yeah, guys, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Again, if you want to see a photo of Dr. Sm Frazier, this is it. This is what he looked like. And I really appreciate all of you joining me today. I don't want to leave you on a negative note. I know that a lot of what we see in the news these days is very negative. But I would like to talk about, for just a second, Ahmaud Arbery. He died. He was murdered in Georgia in February, and the only reason we know about it today is because a radio show host decided to post a clip of his death. The Georgia officials had kept this pretty much under wraps. They hadn't shown even the family this clip, so really yesterday everyone learned about this. And there's nothing more to say because there's too much to say. And we can't let these kinds of things happen, and there should be justice. And I'm glad that the person who released this clip is at least at least because of this clip, we're now getting a grand jury to try and get criminal charges on the two men who did this to Ahmaud. So I'm sorry to leave you on that note, but I did have to talk about it because it was an atrocious act that we should all be aware of. So thank you guys again for listening to me. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to leave you on a negative note, but it's the world that we live in. So thank you guys. Hi again to everybody who joined in late. I appreciate you. I will see you all next week, okay? Goodbye.